out that decarbonization without reducing demand will leave us with only one single pathway to reach the Paris Agreement goal, with no room for failure of any technologies, even those that are still being developed. So it's a risky proposition, but with demand reduction, generally at the economic potential level, we would have multiple pathways to get to the Paris goal. So next slide, please. So more specifically, some of these climate mitigation researchers did a study 10 years ago about the cost and feasibility implication of reaching a previous goal of 80% greenhouse gas norms. Nope, yep, stay there. 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. And really, this finding is pretty astounding to me, because they found that the business as usual would allow about 5 pathways for a various combination of mitigation technologies at a cost of about $24 trillion. But with a significant demand reduction, again, roughly 20 to 30% demand reduction from the business as usual level, it would be 70% reduction of business as usual. Rather than 30% reduction of business as usual at a cost of $7 trillion. So to me, in the context of climate change, this is the real value proposition of efficiency. Is savings are multiplied and carried over to upstream segments, or it should. Next slide, please. So this is in the national context. We published a report a couple of years ago outlining that efficiency economy-wide, not just end use, can deliver roughly half of the greenhouse gas savings needed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. This is a report called Halfway There that you can just Google and download if you're interested. And next year, we will look into what this analysis implies to be the ceiling of end use efficiency, particularly for the building sector. Next slide. So the climate forward efficiency really strives to answer the question of how do we get that large amount of efficiency as a climate mitigation tool? So this is our version of that answer. And earlier we published a framework called Climate Forward Efficiency Roadmap that has 9 core strategies. I'm not going to talk about all of them here, but I'll talk briefly about 2 of those strategies here. Next slide. So really the most important in my mind is setting the efficiency target. It is important that in the context of climate change that we begin to measure savings in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, or at least in terms of BTUs. But ultimately, the saving metrics really will not matter if we don't save enough. With utilities nationwide saving around average of 1% of total energy use, to climate researchers or policymakers, this number could look too small. And I'm mindful of all these efficiency potential studies that indicate a savings percentage that go well into double digits, only to be drastically reduced to a very low single-digit percentage, like 1 or 1.5% savings, when we use the model of voluntary customer adoption based on utility incentives. So in comparison, in 2012, McKinsey released a study that showed that there may be feasible ways of reaching up to 23% reduction of end use consumption of the baseline demand with net present value positive efficiency measures if additional strategies to overcome typical barriers were resolved. So the result of their study was that 23% savings from the baseline demand would be obtainable over a 10-year period with an upfront investment of $520 billion plus program costs for a total gross savings of $1.2 trillion. So these figures really imply a national annual budget for utility efficiency programs that are several times larger than the current budget of $8 billion. And I do think that going forward, it's important for potential studies not to simply accept current market barriers as unchangeable conditions and strategize on how to overcome those barriers. And a better way may even be to identify a maximum acquisition cost for efficiency in a given jurisdiction and procure the maximum amount of those measures, which is an approach used by the Northwest Power Conservation Council. I think it can be described as sort of an achievable technical potential that assumes that 85% of technical potential is obtainable over a 20-year horizon, taking into account market barriers. And a version of this approach is also used in Connecticut. So another insight here is that ratepayer funded program alone may not be sufficient to fully capture the efficiency potential for climate mitigation. So we may really need additional supplements, for example, by involving taxpayer funded statewide programs, maybe ideas like weatherization for all mandate, or innovative market solutions like energy efficiency as a service model. So in short, climate forward efficiency requires scale, and it has to go very big. Next slide. Second key strategy is centering equity. As you know, equity is a complex topic, and we don't presume to have all the answers regarding the best way to center equity in efficiency programs. But in our roadmap, we start with laying out some ideas for procedural equity measures and some structural equity measures, and we hope to develop more specific distributional and intergenerational equity measures. Slide. So at a more programmatic level, to fully capture utility efficiency potential, we need to think about modifying several regulatory constructs. One is long-term planning and looking at potential studies to make sure that they don't underestimate the potential amount of available savings. Another is aligning financial incentives to make efficiency worthwhile for the utilities and to reward them for it, when they meet the performance goals. And making benefit cost tests and EMV constructs fair to EE, because they may be overly restrictive and over-policing that treats cost-effective efficiency measures as if they are not, and always viewing them with suspicion. Next slide. So taking a look at the building sector, again, our analysis from Halfway There report shows that of the 50% economy-wide greenhouse gas savings that could come from efficiency, 1/3 of those will need to come from buildings. Next slide. So in terms of square footage of the buildings, the biggest challenge will remain with the existing buildings, which will make up about 2/3 of all square footage in 2050. However, ignoring new buildings isn't an option, and there are positive trends and examples that consider highly efficient buildings. Examples that constructing highly efficient buildings are becoming easier and cheaper and cost-effective. Next slide. So some of the typical policies that we see that will advance decarbonization of buildings for existing buildings: energy performance standards, appliance standards are important, fuel switching, benchmarking will be sort of a prerequisite to establishing performance standards. There's retro commissioning and tune-up, and other market behavior change measures like time of sale disclosure. For new buildings, again, the building codes are going to be the major workhorse. There's going to be appliance standards are important. Stretch codes are also important. Next slide. So there are some emerging building policies in the utility space, and one of them I'll just talk briefly about, which is clean heat standard. And my colleague on the panel here, Sean, might talk about that too for New York. But so this is idea of the clean heat standard is requiring gas utilities to lower carbon emissions. And this year, clean heat standards were enacted in Colorado and Minnesota. It didn't pass Vermont, but folks in Vermont tell us that it will likely be reintroduced next year. In Colorado, I believe gas utilities there are sometimes electrifying heating as part of their clean heat standard program. So that's an exciting development that I think we should encourage. Next slide. As I mentioned again, the main workhorse of building decarbonization will be codes and standards. There is a positive trend of states adopting high efficiency building codes and performance standards. And although we have to see ultimately how many states adopt these measures, I do hope that I do hope that it will reach everywhere. So one caveat I'll provide is that when it comes to complying with these codes and standards, please be careful about allowing on-site clean generation to substitute for energy reduction. We have to really maintain that generation is not efficiency, no matter how clean it is. And I hope my slides in the beginning will serve as a reminder of why that's the case, why clean generation is not an equal substitute for energy efficiency. Next slide, and this is my last one. So in the context of efficient building policies, based on some preliminary data that we've been gathering, this could be viewed as a kind of a list of strengths and weaknesses in Virginia. Virginia appears to do a great job with code compliance compared to other states, and it has some really great commendable examples of zero energy buildings. It also does a great job when it comes to health and safety remediation and affordable housing. And I really commend you all here for being part of that effort that made all of these great things happen. Potential improvement areas would be to require greater efficiency in residential codes and really allow local jurisdictions to exceed the state baseline for energy codes, the stretch codes, if they so choose. And now that Virginia utilities are deploying smart meters, this would be a great time to start a building energy benchmarking program, which can then lead to a performance standard. And what would complement your leading performance in health and safety remediation in affordable housing will be to require minimum energy standards for state-owned or financed housing. So that concludes my comments, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Edward. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Katie Hatcher at EPA.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Ed, for your remarks ahead of mine. That sets up what I'm about to say very well. So I'm Katie Hatcher with EPA's Energy Star program. I've been working on the Energy Star program with states and local governments and federal agencies and schools, trying to help advance energy efficiency in publicly owned properties, but also actually helping jurisdictions benchmark and work toward improving commercial buildings throughout their jurisdictions to help meet energy efficiency and decarbonization goals. I've been with the agency for a couple of decades, and so it's been exciting to see the different trends kind of emerging and growing and changing, and looking forward to talking to you about benchmarking and building performance improvement programs and how that fits into efficient decarbonization or efficient low carbon buildings. Next slide, please. So as many of you may know, Energy Star is our US symbol for energy efficiency, and it's on 7 billion products nationwide, but we also certify commercial buildings and industrial plants. And then we do certify new homes as well. But in the commercial market with commercial buildings and industrial plants, we have a very strong benchmarking initiative. Next slide, please. So why are we focused on buildings? And it's because of the emissions that are produced by commercial and industrial plants. And then, of course, we want to, in coordination with states and local governments, help work toward all of our goals together. Next slide. So to date, we have more than 280,000 buildings benchmarking in our tool Portfolio Manager, which has become the standard tool used by states and local governments to require benchmarking for disclosure purposes, and then also as a way to analyze and help inform building performance standards. The Portfolio Manager is part of the Energy Star program, and it's a voluntary tool. It's the states and local governments that have chosen to require its usage for some private sector building owners. And so to date, more than 40 local governments and 6 states have benchmarking policies and a much smaller subset have building performance standards. The tool is also adopted and used in Canada, and so it's currently in 2 languages, English, French, and we're actually hoping to, with an agreement, an additional agreement with Puerto Rico, we're hoping to expand it into Spanish. Next slide. So as you can see across the country, there's a growing amount of benchmarking and building performance improvement policies that are being implemented. And most of the large cities across the country have some form of a policy. As I mentioned, there's now 6 states that are following in that direction. Most are leading with benchmarking, and I'll describe more about what I mean by benchmarking. And then again, building performance standards seem to be the trend that's following. Next slide. So why benchmarking and disclosure? If you can think about what the miles per gallon for a car has meant over the many decades to help understand fuel economy of a car, pre-electric vehicles, right? It's that we're trying to do the same thing for commercial buildings, where you can understand the consumption of the building across all fuels, and then understand it on an intensity basis using an energy intensity per square foot. And so tracking this information over time can then, just simply tracking it and making people more aware of it, makes understanding energy consumption more controllable, and your ability to understand why you need to invest in energy efficiency instead of paying for energy you don't need to the utility has been the philosophy that the Energy Star program has brought forward between building owners and product and service providers. And then in the last 10 years or so, jurisdictions decided to become more involved in this to bring more transparency about building consumption to building owners and tenants. And so that's sort of where the disclosure initiative grew into being. And since Portfolio Manager is owned by EPA, it's a public good that can be built upon for this purpose by states and local governments. To go along with that trend, states and local governments programs that had benchmarking programs often then moved to having kind of requirements for audits and assessments and retro commissioning. And performance targets started to be brought into that, with the idea that if you already had an Energy Star building, then maybe you didn't need to actually do an audit because you were meeting a performance level that was indicating that it's one of the most efficient in the country. And however, there was still an interest in trying to get at greenhouse gas reductions and understand energy efficiency in buildings, and then require it for existing buildings. As Ed showed, it's very important in one of his slides that existing buildings and energy efficiency in existing buildings is incredibly important in terms of trying to achieve our long-term goals. So we have continued to work with states and local governments in this area to help think through building performance standards, and then how that can relate to the upper level goals that some states and local governments have to efficiently try to reduce carbon in their buildings. Next slide. So some of these policies, they're different right now, and we're actually working with states and local governments and influencing organizations to try to help create some standardization. With that said, though, our standardization that we're trying to focus on is selection of metrics like weather normalized site energy use intensity, and then coupled with a direct greenhouse gas emissions intensity metric, and other metrics like percent electric. And of course, the Energy Star score can play a role depending on the policy that the state or local government wants to develop. And so the reason why it could be good to have some consistency in these frameworks is to help building owners that have properties in more than one place across the country. And then also just to, well, that's actually one of the main reasons. Next slide. And so some of the variability that we're seeing across the country right now is built by building size, type, again, the performance levels and metric choices, levels of penalties and other types of enforcement, the time frame of the policies and so forth. And then also an area where we're particularly focused is the interest between states and local governments and building owners for normalized consumption to understand how someone's unique business activity could be affecting their consumption pattern. And then, of course, data verification is incredibly important as this information is beginning to be used for enforcement purposes. Again, EPA is not involved in the enforcement of these policies. These are policies that are adopted by states and local governments, and it's their own enforcement that they would need to be needing verified data for. Next slide. So to help try to help create some shape and standardization in this area, EPA created a benchmarking building performance standard policy toolkit. And it has 4 chapters, one that's focused on benchmarking and transparency and kind of why that is a good precursor to having a building performance standard. The idea there is that understanding the performance of the commercial buildings in your jurisdiction is important to understanding what kind of performance targets you might set if there is an interest in pursuing at the policy level a requirement for a building performance standard. And then also, it's really important for states and local governments to coordinate. We are seeing that local governments may be passing policy that has particular requirements, and then the state may be interested in passing something that has different requirements. And so for building owners, that could get quite confusing. So how it fits together between the state and local level is very important. And there's this 4th section on data access, utility data access. So not to go into too much detail here in this one, but the main point is that for some building categories, particularly those with multiple tenants, it's not possible actually for the building owner to get whole building data for their property to then benchmark it correctly and understand the investment opportunities across the whole property. And so we have an effort working with utilities to provide data at an aggregated level for a property, meaning that with privacy aspects protected for the tenants, that the building owner would receive from the utility the total amount of electricity for that property that's used, so they can use it for benchmarking purposes. We also have created a metrics recommendation document that points to the use of site energy, weather normalized site energy use intensity, and direct greenhouse gas emissions intensity, and it has a little bit about normalization. We will be coming out with more recommendations about target setting, probably in the middle part of 2023. I think there's more to be said and thought about how to apply an analysis to then determine targets by space type for the purpose of a building performance standard. And so we'll be weighing in on that. Portfolio manager is the tool that's used for the states and local governments that have benchmarking initiatives and building performance standards in the commercial market across the country. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. We also have some other tools. I'm not going to go into the details about these, but these Avert, Cobra, and eSyst, and our Energy Star buildings emissions calculator are good for helping understand impacts and estimating goals. Let's see. Next slide. So EPA offers technical assistance to help states and local governments think through all of what I've been talking about. And one of the most important things that I'll mention now is that as there is more money coming through to states, which have been historically short on resources to try to help stand up programs and influence efficiency in the commercial buildings in their jurisdictions, have the opportunity to actually advance statewide or local government-wide commercial building benchmarking initiatives and building improvement initiatives that help understand current performance, help take advantage strategically of incentives and that are coming through for energy efficiency and decarbonization. And then that information could then be utilized to help inform building performance targets. For example, the building performance targets could be voluntary and woven into a program framework for an incentive-based program. And then that type of initiative would help inform any interest in actual mandates for building performance levels at some future date, if that were ever politically feasible. I think some parts of the country, building performance targets will be politically feasible, and in other areas they'll be less so. So it's important to keep working toward efficient buildings, particularly as they move toward electrifying. And as Ed mentioned, it's important to for on-site renewable energy, it's important to not treat that as an efficiency measure. And Portfolio Manager does count that into the site energy use intensity equation. It does provide a benefit on the emission side for the property, of course, but it is energy that's consumed by the building. And so it's important to move toward energy efficiency measures that do incorporate on-site renewables where appropriate. However, they don't displace efficiency. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Portfolio Manager. So it's the tool that's used for benchmarking energy use and documenting performance improvements over time. It's also the pathway to apply for Energy Star certification. So I haven't mentioned yet, but a number of these local governments are already also benchmarking water and using Portfolio Manager to work toward performance improvements for water efficiency. And there's also a part of the tool that focuses on recycling and materials management, bringing calculated diversion rate and so forth. And so we expect to see that could be incorporated into some plans that states and local governments have in the future. The tool also has features to allow you to track your renewables and your green power purchases. And next slide, please. This is just a list of some of the many metrics that are commonly used in policies that I've been mentioning. Next slide. And for Energy Star certification, a building that performs at a 75 or higher on our scale and meets these ASHRAE standards for indoor environmental quality can earn the Energy Star. The data needs to be reviewed by a licensed professional. So Energy Star certified buildings are verified in terms of their performance level. We're encouraging states and local governments that have any kind of benchmarking and building performance improvement initiatives to also verify data, because obviously if there's incentives or penalties being given out, then verification is incredibly important. Next slide. We have a host of other resources that can be woven into benchmarking and building performance improvement programs that help organizations understand their energy efficiency opportunity and how that relates to their own cash flow. We have fun guides and competitions and lots of online training and support. So essentially, what states and local governments can do is create a benchmarking and building performance improvement program incredibly easily with our ready-to-use resources that are essentially like a program in a box, and you can just adapt them for your own use. And again, these are focused on not just leadership by example in publicly owned buildings, but also commercial buildings across a jurisdiction. Next slide. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. Next, we have Sean Hoyt with Con Edison. I'm very excited that Sean is able to join us. I saw his presentation at the NEEP conference back in June in Baltimore, and excited that more Virginians can learn about what they're doing in New York. So Sean, take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me? The first question.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sean Hoy. I work at Con Edison. I've been there for nearly 16 years now. Time really goes by quickly. Half of my career was spent in the field as an electrician, the second half in the energy efficiency space. So during this presentation, I'm going to walk you through some of the policies that are driving this cause up in our region, some of the sort of goals that we have at Con Edison and at the city and state level, and then some technologies that I'm really excited about moving forward towards decarbonization. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the utilities role and the evolution of our role in clean energy. Now, historically, maybe 2 decades ago, the utilities relationship with our customers was very transactional. We are in New York City the provider of 3 commodities, electric, steam, and gas, and we serve the 10 million customers that live in New York City and Westchester County. We acted primarily as a bill collector. We provide safe, reliable energy, and our customers would pay us for the services. Today, energy efficiency has changed that landscape very much, and it's become a commodity in many ways. The energy service provided by the utility is reduced by means of energy efficiency measures at the customer side. And our relationship has shifted more to a partnership and social responsibility for our customers. We have a diverse market segment. If anyone seen the opening slide, New York City is a dynamic place to be and visit and live in. One of the greatest cities in the world, arguably. And our customers and the people that visit are very diverse and dynamic. So really trying to help them achieve their clean energy goals is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and as well as Con Edison. The growth strategy, investing $1.5 billion in energy efficiency and heating electrification by 2025, that is a moving target. It's estimated that it will be more than that, as we have, I'll talk to you about some programs that we've been running that have exceeded our expectations, for lack of better words. And then the last bullet or next segment on this side is that we really want to become a trusted energy advisor to our customers. We don't want to be an afterthought. We don't want to be seen as the big 800-pound gorilla in the room. We want to be seen as a trusted energy advisor when they're making some of the decisions that they haven't had to make historically. Next slide, please. To further set the landscape, though, I just wanted to outline who our regulators were. On the left side, you'll see the federal side of the house. So FERC, or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the United States, is really the regulator of the transmission and wholesale sales of electricity. Right? That's what we call upstream. And they also set mandatory reliability standards for the electric system via NERC. For our purposes of Con Edison, we manage the distribution system. So we don't manage the transmission system. It's managed by the New York Independent System Operator, right? Because in the late 1990s, we were deregulated. So the New York State Public Service Commission began to deregulate the state's electricity industry through a series of rate restructuring settlement agreements with incumbent vertically integrated utilities. So vertically integrated means that we own the transmission and distribution. So since the late 1990s, we were only responsible for the delivery of the distribution system at Con Edison. And the Public Service Commission also regulates and oversees the electric, gas, and water and telecommunication industries in New York as part of the Department of Public Service. Next slide, please. So these are some of the state's energy goals. Again, a moving target. I laid it out on this chart just to show you that the amount of work that needs to be achieved by 2030 is a lot of the heavy lifting. You'll see 850,000 EVs, 6 gigawatts of distributed solar, energy storage, and heat pump savings are really coming up on 2025, right? So we really have high targets for 2025 that carry over to 2030. Then you start to see it tail off a little bit towards 2035, an additional 3 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, and on our way to net zero by 2040. These goals are some of the most ambitious goals in the nation. And the world is watching as we in New York State try to achieve some of these very, very ambitious goals for the decarbonization of our economy. On the next slide, please. This slide kind of maps out some of those goals and the policies that are driving them. So the New York State goals are really led at the state level by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Again, most of those targets you saw detailed on the chart in the previous slide on where we need to kind of hit on, right? With a very, very strong emphasis on the electrification and energy efficiency component of this. Should note that, as indicated on the slide, 22 million tons of carbon reduction through energy efficiency and electrification is what's needed. And that's just going to be a drop in the bucket if we're looking towards really decarbonizing our economy by the goals set forth by the state. The new efficiency New York order is a little separate. That's really what the joint utilities in New York State are kind of bound to by the New York State Public Service Commission. Currently, we're in an interim review, which is really going to kind of see exactly how we are trending towards those goals and maybe adjust what we have to achieve moving forward. But again, it outlines our 6-year EE budgets and goals for all joint utilities in New York State. And something that I'm happy was included is that $36.5 million to train over almost 20,000 New Yorkers for clean energy jobs, which I have a slide on a little bit later. But for those that aren't aware, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, works at the state level as well. They were responsible for all energy efficiency programs leading up to our energy efficiency portfolio standard in 2009, where they gave all responsibility, or the majority of the responsibility rather, to the joint utilities in New York State. At the bottom, you'll see Con Ed's response and our commitment to these policies. We are 100% in alignment. Again, tripling our energy efficiency investments by 2030. Again, that's a $1.5 billion investment by 2025 as an interim goal. We're all in support of clean transportation through electric vehicles, and we're doing our best with the energy storage solutions for our customer base. It's very important to note that New York City's largest commercial buildings will potentially be seeing fines for a city policy that's not indicated on this slide. That's called Local Law 97. It's a New York State carbon reduction law that sets caps for energy use in New York City's largest commercial building starting in 2024, and then becoming more stringent through 2050. Reducing emissions from buildings is the most significant action the city can take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in New York City as it stands today. And it also is going to be one of the most complex things to do, as the building stock is relatively old and retrofitting buildings is becoming more and more challenging as we go on. Next slide, please. Again, as indicated on the last bullet of the slide, Con Edison's clean energy commitment is laid out in 5 pillars. Pillar 1, build the grid of the future. This will include the development of clean energy hubs to facilitate those 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind, new substations, local transmission projects. We're facilitating significant expansion of DERs, or distributed energy resources, of the grid, and then leading the energy industry and enabling interconnections of building capacity for those distributed energy resources as well. Empowering all of our customers to meet climate goals. We aim to invest billions of dollars to reduce building carbon reduction emissions. We're focusing deeply on energy efficiency upgrades, building electrification, heating, electrification of heating systems, and all in on electric vehicles. Pillar 3, we imagine the gas system. We do have a large gas footprint. So we want to provide our customers with heating options through our non-pipeline solutions programs, through our clean heat or clean energy alternatives, and developing low carbon fuels portfolio to serve the hard to electrify customers. Lead by reducing our company's carbon footprint. We want to reduce our own carbon footprint, so we lead by example. We just released an integrated long range plan that encompasses our electric, gas, and steam system. We believe that reducing the carbon footprint of our steam system, which is one of the largest in the world, which accounts for about 85% of our scope 1 emissions, would be very, 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 very instrumental in the decarbonization of our economy. We're looking at energy efficiency for our steam system as well. That should be on the horizon within the next couple of years. Again, low carbon fuels, electrification of boilers and clean energy solutions, carbon capture and sequestration. There's a variety of ways that we're looking to reduce our own company's carbon footprint. And last but certainly not least is partnering with our stakeholders. In my current role at Con Edison, I'm responsible for a section called Clean Energy Networks, which is really the driving force behind widespread cross-sector collaborations towards market transformation within the energy efficiency space. One of the key components of partnering with our stakeholders is building existing efforts for green job trainings, STEM programs and workforce development, including the one that I'll talk to you later today, which is the Clean Energy Academy. So these are just little highlights about Con Edison's clean energy commitment and the 5 pillars that are really driving us towards decarbonization. Next slide, please. A number of ways that we learn about what to do as we partner with other stakeholders and we do research and studies. So the Pathways to Carbon Neutral NYC is a study with objectives to understand how different measures from energy efficiency, electrification, low carbon fuels, district systems will impact our carbon reduction, infrastructure, investments, and annual peak and energy consumption over time. The study was conducted by a team. It's the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability, which has been rebranded to the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Also, we partnered with our colleagues at Con Edison and National Grid. ICF was the consultant with Energy Futures Initiative, and Drexel University, amongst a number of 25 member committee stakeholders that really gave us some insight onto what the different pathways would be to achieve at least 80% direct emissions while putting the city on a path toward carbon neutrality. We focus heavily on buildings, transport, electric, gas, and district sectors for this study. And really what we wanted to understand was how different levels of key decarbonization measures, including the impact of low carbon reduction, infrastructure investment needs, and overall annual peak energy consumption would vary over time. The city would plan to use this, which is fully public information, to inform Local 197 rulemaking, which is currently underway. Next slide, please. This slide just really identifies some of the components of the assumed key pathways. Again, I think that the diversified section, which will be to the far right, would give us the best chance to really hit our goals. But if you look from top down and focus on the buildings and industrial, energy efficiency retrofits make up a huge amount of what needs to be accomplished in order to be successful. Key cross-sector and cross-commodity interdependencies are also what will be needed to be successful in this entire effort. And really the report, the study, identified how these different approaches and measures can help us reach the same goal, including what policies and technologies will be needed to transform these different sectors. On the next slide, please, we could talk a little bit about some of the programs that Con Edison is running. So we have a program for every market segment. If you look to the left, I put it in terms of technology just to frame the different sort of targeted segments. But for residential, it's 1 to 4 family units. Multifamily, 5 units and above. Those are the larger mixed-use buildings that may have storefronts at the bottom. Small to medium business program is a program that I managed for several years. That's the storefronts, the bodegas, really the heartbeat of New York City when you think about it. During the pandemic, when restaurants were shut, when all those social different places were closed down, it kind of deflated us until they reopened. So that's what really is in the SMB market segment. And then large commercial industrial, the Empire State Buildings, the big venues, those really large end users. Energy efficiency has primarily dominated in these 4 core market segments. The technologies that we deployed for the most part has been lighting. Now we're anticipating that lighting will go away in the future. I think Ed mentioned some codes and standards that, eventually would make LED lighting the baseline for buildings. So we have to kind of look beyond that. We also have been successful in implementing refrigeration, HVAC, setup controls, and gas measure upgrades for our customers that reside in New York City. Energy storage, we have some good projects that came out of our non-wires solutions and non-wires alternatives program. One notably the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program, where we had a lithium-ion battery installed in a low to moderate income housing unit, which is called Marcus Garvey. It's in a part of Brooklyn. One of the first lithium-ion batteries installed in New York City. We really look for it to be a catalyst for more to come. For electric vehicles, we have a robust electric vehicle program at Con Edison, where we are electrifying a lot of our medium and heavy duty fleets. A lot of electric vehicle charging stations going up through our Make Ready program. And we're really looking again to really solidify our position as leaders in that space. The one thing that I want to note for all of these programs, if you look to the chart to the right before we jump back to the left of the bottom two that we will talk a little bit more in further detail, is our programs we want to design with a lens of equity. And we want to make sure that none of our customers are left behind by the historical energy industry that has disserviced some customers that live close to fossil fuel-fired plants, by bus depots, in areas that really they have no choice but to live in because they can't afford to move out of those locations, but have been very detrimental to their health because of the carbon emissions in the locations that they live in, and really not completely being thoughtful about how do we design our programs through a lens of equity in our system through that lens. So that there's a heavy emphasis on this right now. At Con Edison, we do have an environmental justice working group that's really thinking through how do we position ourselves to be leaders in this space and to make sure that we encompass all of our customers, not only the customers that have always been included. So this chart is interesting to see how managing the transition near to market opportunities and the holistic approach to decarbonization through a lens of equity can actually be managed. If I may jump back to the left now, the two technology categories that I really want to discuss beyond lighting, because again, stretch codes and different sort of standards will kind of make the historical technologies that we've deployed obsolete for our programs. So I do want to focus on heat pump technologies, which are applicable to all market segments as a driver for removing fossil fuel from our customers' premises, and then a waste heat recovery project that I'm working on right now. So on the next slide, please. So this is one of the waste heat recovery systems. It's a heat pump water heater that we're looking to deploy in New York City as it stands right now. There are a number of vendors and technology providers that we're working with, but for the purpose of this presentation, this one is designed by Shark, a Canadian-based company, and the system is called a Piranha. So when you think about any building that has domestic hot water usage, it could be a hotel, it could be a fitness center, it could be a brewery, it could be a commercial laundromat. There's a large amount of wasted heat that gets discarded. It really comes from usage. It goes through the piping system, and it'll settle in a wastewater tank. Then it'll get discarded out to whatever municipality collects it. For this system that we're looking to install, essentially, when that wasted heat water gets run off into the piping, the system sits in between it. It captures the heat, it extracts it like a heat exchanger, and then discards that same wastewater to the tank as usual. What it does with that heat is it captures it, and instead of heating up the domestic hot water from the building from 0-degree temperature, it's heating it up from about 70 degrees, which saves a significant amount of the gas on site for the electricity that would have to heat the water up to that same building. Right, so we're very, very fascinated by the opportunity here. There are a number of buildings that could benefit from a technology of this source, and hopefully sometime in the near future, maybe I'll get invited back to give you a case study testimony on how this project worked out. But we're currently engaged with a number of customers that we're looking forward to getting this deployed in. And on the next slide, you'll see the actual clean heat program that was mentioned earlier by Ed. So this is an entire statewide effort. All the joint utilities of New York State have what we call a clean heat program, which is to incentivize heat pump technologies. Now, at Con Edison, we kind of hit our target a little bit early, as in earlier this year. We had to file a petition to extend and unpause our program so that we could get back to business, which was approved by the New York State Public Service Commission. We're currently redesigning the program, and we're looking to launch it back earlier next year. But the main driver of the program has been so far to date the central air source heat pumps, our ductless mini splits, and then the VRF systems. And the primary drivers were within the residential sector, which was something a surprise to us, something that's exciting. Customers are picking it up, and they're also decommissioning their traditional legacy fossil fuel-based furnaces and boilers, which is even more efficient for us, because if you're not decommissioning this on-site systems, then really all we're doing is decarbonizing the air conditioning capabilities of the system because you're still running your traditional heating system. So we were really taken by surprise at the rapid market adoption, and we're looking forward to getting back to business earlier next year on that program. One of the key drivers that I've been working on with my Clean Energy Network teams is really advancing the geothermal part of the technology. So we have a number of projects that we're looking to deploy again sometime in the near future that, again, will really shift the direction of how these technologies are deployed and adopted in New York City, and hopefully the nation will follow. And again, the heat pump water heaters, similar to what I referenced in the previous slide, but the other one is a waste heat recovery heat pump water heater, whereas the one indicated on this slide is a traditional heat pump water heater. And on my last slide, I just wanted to kind of showcase actually, sorry, not my last slide, second to last slide. This is a very important slide. So this is the Clean Energy Academy that I co-sponsored when I was the manager of the SMB program. Really, it was really not really something that I would say we thought would be as successful as it's been. We launched it at the end of 2019, had the first cohort go through and graduate in February of 2020, had to pivot to remote learning because of the pandemic. And I'm excited to announce that this November, we would have our 500th participant graduating from the program, of which about 150 that were unemployed are now working either for Con Edison, for our implementation contracts, or for our participating contractors that work within the energy efficiency programs at Con Edison. So this is a very, very much initiative that is important, understanding that all those technologies that we're looking to deploy, our customer base doesn't really have the knowledge that we need a workforce that's able to intelligently explain and describe and sell these projects to our customers. There's no better way than to reach back out into the disadvantaged communities, which 50% of the participants must come from priority populations, and give them the opportunity to really be leaders in this space. And now to my last slide. This is kind of how Con Edison envisions our role in the future electric grid. We have a number of different pathways now. It used to be just you generate electricity, you transport it, and then you distribute it, and there's losses along the way. Not really many efficiencies. Now we have a two-way flow of electricity on our grid, where we're acting as the air traffic controller, making sure that we're monitoring performance, helping our customers make the best decisions while maintaining a safe and reliable and flexible grid. And all of this information could be found on our Con Edison distribution system implementation plan as indicated in the link below. And that's all I have. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Sean. We appreciate your presentation. Next, we're going to turn it over to Eric Evans with Columbia Gas to talk about how gas can play a role in decarbonization. Thanks. Hand it over to Sean.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Eric Evans. I'm representing Columbia Gas of Virginia. Go to the next slide. Just as a brief overview, Columbia Gas of Virginia is one of the 6 energy delivery companies of NiSource. Here in Virginia, we serve about 300,000 customers across the Commonwealth, 98 different communities, and over a 20,000 square mile service area. And so what I'm going to talk about is the pathways or that we're looking at to help decarbonize the system. Move on to the next slide. When we look at our emissions, they're in 3 different categories. Scope 1, which we have the most control of, the direct emissions from our facilities. Scope 2, which are by far the smallest emissions for us, really just the related to the purchased electricity for our buildings. And then the biggest chunk of our emissions are Scope 3, which as a gas company, the product we deliver to customers, it does emit emissions. And that's kind of the biggest thing we want to start focusing on. If you go to the next slide. So we've been focused on driving down methane emissions, for many years. And some of the new things we're looking at, we started to use the Picaro vehicles, which are advanced leak detection. These vehicles can much faster drive through our territory, identify and measure leaks. so we can find those and repair them at a faster basis. We've also started looking at net zero vacuum emissions technology, where it can depressurize a pipeline that we need to work on rather than emitting methane into the atmosphere. And then we're also starting to look at satellite detection technology as another method similar to Picaro that help us quickly find and identify leaks. Go to the next slide, please. So to date, or as of last year, 21, we've reduced 32% of our Scope 1 emissions. And that's mainly driven by our pipeline modernization through the Virginia SAVE program. We've been replacing and modernizing our pipe. We eliminated all cast iron pipe by 2015. And we're continuing to spend millions of dollars every year to continue to modernize the system. As we continue to roll out the advanced leak detection, such as Picaro and satellites, we'll continue to drive down our methane emissions into the future. Go to the next slide, please. So the main thing I want to talk about is what we want to do next. As we start looking at Scope 3 emissions, we've developed an example resource mix. So using scenario analysis, looking at existing data that we have today, we've modeled out and built what the future resource mix could look like for Columbia by 2050. This really is a work in progress. As I said, it's a current information we have today, based on current assumption on technology. As we get more and more information, we'll be able to constantly update and review this to find the optimal pathway or resource mix to reduce emissions for our customers. Go to the next slide, please. And all the modeling that we've done to date came up with this example resource mix. So by 2050, this is what we see this resource mix looking like. And we came up with it by focusing on affordability, reliability, and stability of energy prices for the customers, using a portfolio that supports sustainability and decarbonization, focused on optionality to respond to changing markets and new technology, and regulatory feasibility and local economic impact. So we really wanted to come up with to maximize those. Going into it, we tried to have an open mind. What was going to be the best way to decarbonize our system, and really the least impact to our customers. We really wanted to focus on that affordability and stability while finding a way to decarbonize. What we came up with, by 2050, we would see still using some pipeline gas or geologic natural gas, but then also blending into that certified natural gas, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and in concert with energy efficiency, rolling out gas-fired heat pumps. And we would see some electrification. So, even though the gas company, we're not saying that no electrification, there would be some beneficial electrification that would happen over time. And we see that as part of the resource mix as we move forward. Go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows how that resource mix would play out over time. Of course, we wouldn't do it all at once. It would gradually build between now and 2050. Starting this decade, we'd see a switch to certified natural gas, continue advancing our energy efficiency programs, start to begin by injecting some renewable natural gas and hydrogen into the system, probably later on in this decade, and potential some use of carbon offsets to meet reduction targets. And then in the 2030s, we continue to scale all of that up. So we'd scale up more RNG, scale up energy efficiency, start pushing technology, really try to roll out gas heat pumps and get customers to embrace new advanced technologies that can continue to reduce their consumption and emissions. And then as we get into the long term in the 2040s, we'd start to build out that hydrogen supply chain, where we'd see delivering some dedicated hydrogen to certain customers, probably industrial and electric generation, blending some hydrogen into the system to continue to decarbonize and get us to that 2050 point where we've got a pretty well decarbonized system, providing a blend of resources to our customers. If you go to the next slide. So this resource mix would benefit all customers in our mind. Our residential and commercial customers would benefit from increased energy efficiency and a fuel mix that doesn't require switching out any of their equipment. Industrial customers would have continued access to the gas distribution system, plus access to pure hydrogen if they want to go that route.
The perception of heat pumps and their ability to effectively heat and cool a home, from a comfort perspective, manufacturers have some work to do there. And obviously from an environmental standpoint, moving to low to no GWP refrigerants, reducing greenhouse gas.
To all. Go to the next slide, please. As I said, this is something that will continue to evolve over time. It's not going to happen overnight. We'll build up to this. And there are a lot of uncertainties that could impact how quickly or how slowly this could roll out. And the resource mix I've shown, we're assuming certain outcomes of those uncertainties. If certain things happen, it could speed this up, or it could slow things down a little bit. And those are things like state and local policies around building codes, carbon prices could impact that, as well as access to grants and subsidies. Domestic gas production could also impact this, as prices could be greater or less than expected. Customer behavior is another big one. We're assuming customers will get on board and want to embrace new technologies. We'll certainly we want to try to incent that, but how fast or how slowly they want to adopt to energy efficiency and new technologies could impact the rollout. And of course, the technology itself. How quickly is hydrogen available, or clean hydrogen available? Are gas heat pumps, commercially available? In those sorts of other technologies. Go to the next slide. This slide provides some more detail on the types of technologies and initiatives we looked at. Many of them are opportunities for federal funding and support. A couple do not. Certified natural gas doesn't have any direct funding. However, any carbon pricing or methane fees would certainly encourage faster adoption of certified natural gas. And the same thing with offsets. There's no direct funding for offsets, but that is something that we could see or could get some indirect benefit through other policies and initiatives. And I believe that's my last slide. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Eric. I believe that Salome has been able to join us after having some technical difficulty. Salome, if you're there, I will turn it over to you to handle about 6 minutes of Q&A.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I apologize I wasn't able to join you a little earlier. I had some major technical issues, but wonderful presentations. I want to thank the entire panel. But we do have some questions. And the first one I want to start with is with Eric. You mentioned in the resource mix, this also can apply to Sean, as he mentioned it as well, but you mentioned RNG making about 31% of your resource mix. Is that realistic? How much RNG is available? Oh, you're on mute there. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a great question. Actually, that's one we I get a lot, even internally. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainties, but to try to be objective about that, we used some publicly available sources, looking at American Gas Foundation study around RNG, as well as some of the work that the DOE has done around that, and took a conservative approach. And based on that 31% is available in Virginia. It should be without, and that without taking all the RNG available, as within the state. So we do believe that is a conservative and fairly achievable number to meet.
Thank you. Sean, the next question is for you. I think, especially for those of us that have been actively working to implement energy efficiency programs, electrification programs, the New York City, the heat pump program, we've heard about how popular it has been. Can you speak to the success and, why do you think, I understand you guys blew your budget like much earlier than expected, and it was very popular. Do you mind speaking a little bit to that?
Yeah, we like to say that we hit our goal, not blew our budget, but obviously the budget goes with
well, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we did a lot of promoting and really put out a program that the market was ready for, especially in New York City. Is you have a lot of first adopters in New York City, but I think it was also the way that the incentives were structured. One measure that I didn't mention that we're looking to really rapidly deploy is building envelope. So when a customer or a contractor paired the heat pump technology with building envelope, they had an increased incentive, because what we're doing then is we're able to right size the equipment, right? So we're not oversizing anymore. We're not sort of deploying the technology knowing that there's going to be drop-offs of efficiency because of the building shell. So that was one of the key drivers. And then decommissioning as well, because a lot of customers originally weren't decommissioning. So we added an incentive for decom for the projects, and that was rapidly adopted. Those are some of the drivers of what happened. And then the market reaction, we have over 300 participating contractors that work in the Clean Heat program. And that's not only the contractors that are installing, then you have the manufacturers that are driving this change, just the market itself. It's very receptive, and the customers were receptive as well. That's kind of what led to the popularity of it in New York City.
And is there plans to continue this program? Yeah. You're reissuing it?
Yes. So we're closing out the program as is. We went into a pause earlier this year, and we're looking to relaunch at the beginning of 2023. Most likely in January or February, there'll be a restructured program, but we're all in.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I wanted to give opportunity to the rest of the audience. If you guys have any questions, we have a great panel, federal side, policy side, implementing utility side. Okay, and so if there aren't any, my next question is for Kathy. In DC, of course, I represent, DC Sustainable Energy Utility. We've been doing, benchmarking for a long time. Just, this is not necessarily electrification question, but what state has done the best job in benchmarking, do you think? What is the model?
Well, so in terms of statewide benchmarking, there's actually only one state that has multiple years of collecting data, and that's actually California. AB 802.
Outside of California.
Okay. I would say that so Washington State's program, actually, which is actually a building performance standard program, they mandated that buildings meet energy efficiency targets by a certain date. But actually, as a precursor to that, what they've done is they've funded incentives for early performance improvement. So essentially, the model there is that if the buildings meet the performance targets ahead of time, they receive money. If they don't meet them by the deadline, then they have a penalty. So I would think that states thinking through what their plan is and using benchmarking data. Most states don't have statewide benchmarking programs. So my recommendation there would be for states to adopt statewide benchmarking programs. And so they have the data that's coming in, they can analyze which space types are performing to various targets now, and then help use that information to inform what they would like to work together with the building owners to achieve in those properties to achieve mutually beneficial efficiency and decarbonization or low carbon goals. But then it also helps them think through how to position the encouragement of the use of incentives that are out there, that are coming through, whether they're in some things like 179D, which is a whole building improvement incentive, ultimately, where you can document performance over a baseline. And so there's just a plethora of incentives that are going to be coming out, and it would be great to see states and local governments folding those into broader benchmarking initiatives.
Thank you for that, Patty. On DC's front, for those buildings that have scored less than 62.1, as you said in the portfolio manager, for low-income buildings, we have started a new program called the Retrofit Accelerator Program, where we are, putting money in to get them to at least the 75 range. So if you're interested in that, look that up. Andrew, in the chat, I see you have a question. I'm going to ask the quicker one. This is to Eric. Given the energy efficiency numbers Edward presented and the incredible energy savings they promised, why is energy efficiency such a small part of Columbia's 2050 mix?
Yeah, it's really cost driven. As we modeled everything out, we're trying to balance decarbonization with cost to customer. And certainly you can spend more and more on energy efficiency, but our model showed that the cost benefit, you reach a certain point and we could still achieve it, and it's actually cheaper to start bringing in RNG and hydrogen, those sorts of things, than just expanding more and more energy efficiency. So it's all it is. It's just cost, trying to minimize the cost impact to customers.
Okay, I do have one more question for Eric. Can you speak a little bit about gas-fired heat pumps versus the electric?
Yeah, essentially gas-fired heat pumps are, it's exactly, instead of using electricity, it used natural gas to power the heat pumps. There's two different versions, engine-driven and absorption-driven. We're focused more on the absorption heat pump, which uses some natural gas heat to power the heat pump and move heat into a building, or reverse and pull heat out of a building. They're really only available right now for commercial customers. There are many companies looking at a residential model that are supposed to be on the market as soon as next year. And the big advantage is they can provide up to 160% efficiency at freezing or below freezing, where an electric heat pump loses efficiency as you get colder and colder outside. The gas heat pump does not. So you can actually get higher efficiency and lower cost to customer with a gas heat pump versus an electric heat pump.
Is this in pilot phase, or are we, there are, buildings that are actively using this?
It's really more in the pilot phase, at least the United States. Canada is ahead of us, so is Europe and Asia use these quite a bit. But here in the US, it's more pilot phase. And we hope to see it advance beyond that. And like I said, have them commercially available soon, hopefully, to customers. So.
And they would use natural gas.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Right. So it looks like we have 1 minute, maybe. Again, like this is a question for you, Eric. Again, let me ask, as it was asked in the chat, how does the CGV deploy the electrification strategies noted in slide 58? Are those strategies you note in the 2050 fuel mix pie chart?
Yeah, and this is still really a work in progress. I mean, we've done the modeling. We've got this mix. There's work to do. We haven't even started on the regulatory and other things we need to do to achieve these. So this is it really is an example resource mix. We have much more work to do before really we roll this out. We started on some. We are buying some certified natural gas for this winter in Virginia, and we filed for a program where customers could opt in to renewable natural gas and carbon offset. So we're in progress on that. The rest of it, we're still working through those details and what that strategy will look like.
Okay, thank you so much. On my end, I want to thank the entire panel. Wonderful presentation. It's great to see representation from all aisles of electrification. So thank you all. I'll pass it on to either Jessica.
Great, thank you all. We will be closing the breakout sessions now and going back into the main room where we'll have our virtual networking session, or if you would rather take a quick break from the computer, we just ask that you come back at 11:15, which is when the next round of breakout sessions will commence. So thank you to our speakers. This was a wonderful panel.
Thank you.